For this episode of Geoff Talk, we are talking about one of the biggest issues possibly influencing society and the workplace today, mental health. And for this one, we've brought out the big guns. Louise Woodhead is a partner at marketing firm We Are Tall and also spends her time addressing positive mental health in the workplace. She is a former model, having worked in London, Paris and Milan in the 1990s, and in 2019 she made a triumphant return to the runway by scooping the Top Model UK over 25 title in the 36 to 45 age category. Tommy Velez made his acting debut as the lead in the 2017 thriller Darker Shades of Elise and has since featured in more than 10 independent films, including Suicide Club, Unhinged and Wretched Things. He's won 12 international awards as both an actor and model and worked for brands such as Timberland, Diesel and Ted Baker, to name just three. And in 2018 appeared on the cover of legendary music magazine NME. Dr. Parvinder Shergill has an abundance of television and radio credits to her name in her capacity as a mental health specialist and frontline medical worker. As an actress, she's appeared in a number of independent films, including horror The New Girl and the soon-to-be-released Anonymous, but is possibly best known as the host of the hugely successful, award-winning podcast, The Secret Psychiatrist. So let's bring in my guest, Louise Woodhead, Tommy Velez, and Dr. Parvinder Shergill. Welcome to Geoff Talk.
Thank you. Hello.
Thank you for having me, Geoff. Thank you.
Hello. Nice to be with you.
Thank you for joining me. I'd love to have you all back as individual guests in the future, because I think you've all got fascinating stories to tell. But tonight, it's all about mental health, both positive and negative, and everything in between. I'd like to come to you first, Tommy. A successful actor, model, businessman. Tell us your story.
I think from a young age, I've had a bit of a difficult relationship with myself, to be honest. I've had difficult relationships with older people, and I've just had the lowest point of my life, I was probably about, I know exactly when it was 2013. I had a really, really dark time then where I just nothing fitted in my life with me. I don't know. I felt like I was having an identity crisis. I was having manic depression. I was having severe anxiety. All as a result of a number of things. I had a job that I hated. I was in a relationship that I didn't want to be in. There was just so much going on, and it was just building up. And I got to a point where I was literally at the lowest point of my life, and I was ready to just end it all, if I'm being completely honest. And my mum rang me, and I wasn't even on speaking terms with my mum. It was quite magical, really. I was fortunate, in the sense that my mum rang me and said, I just screamed down the phone to her. I was like, because she didn't even know where I was at that point. She didn't even know. We weren't even on speaking terms for about 12 to 18 months. We just weren't talking. I had a really bad relationship with everyone in my life at that time. And somehow she just knew. She rang me and that was it.
Isn't it strange or bizarre of how the slightest thing can give you a negative or positive stance when you are suffering with a mental health issue?
Massively. Like it just, the smallest things is what really kind of sends you almost off the edge. Like you're just like.
And Louise, to you, on the surface, everything looks fabulous. Great job in marketing, dancing, acting, modelling. But is that part of the problem, this front we all have to put on?
Well, I'm an actor, so yeah, that helps. So I guess by intro, my career background is 20 years in the city. But when I actually started out, I'd done a bit of modelling in the period where I was at university, just part-time. And it went well in that they offered me a chance to do it pro, but I'd already invested a lot in my studies. So I felt the right thing to do was to sort of finish and pursue that career, which I did. I would say my career has been challenging in many levels. That industry is tough and has faced recession and many other challenges, and it's a tough act. And about 18 months ago, I decided to take some time out and decide, yeah, so if it's not business I want to do, I'm sort of halfway through my career now. Is it right that I carry on? Instinctively, I felt it wasn't. So I took time out and had a think. During that time, I applied for Top Model and went through that process, was selected as a finalist, and eventually won for my category. And I guess my reason for doing that was a little bit of sort of wistfulness about the sort of life I could have had, but didn't as a 20-year-old aspiring model. So I think really winning that was a big change for me in terms of confidence, and I think realizing that, you know, it's never too late. Anxiety, in and around all of that, coincidentally or not, I was diagnosed with anxiety last year, and health anxiety in particular, although it manifests itself into different forms. It's something I didn't know I had. I thought the symptoms I'd been having for arguably my whole life, but definitely adult. And I think essentially that real change in career led me to sort of, I guess, reevaluate what I was feeling and actually seek help to see if it was something more significant. So that led to the diagnosis. I've gone through CBT and I'm still learning how to cope with the anxiety, and I'm actually starting to study mental health as well, which is really helping. So I think
let me just butt in. What were the differences you noticed between your mental health and the mental health of those around you, between the corporate world and now the creative world?
Yeah, I think the overriding differences in the corporate world, and certainly my behavior in the corporate world and my expectation of myself is to really have a facade of coping, and that is being strong, being confident, being in control, being credible, having gravitas, being successful. And I think years and years of doing that, and now, very ironically, I have to sort of break down all of those walls. And as an artist, I have to now be very in touch with my true feelings, my true self, truth in itself, and learn how to present myself in an entirely different light.
So, Dr. Parvinder, thank you for being so patient and listening. Would love to hear your thoughts on what you've heard so far, and two very different journeys.
I mean, firstly, I'm thank you so much for being so honest. I appreciate how difficult that is. It's difficult for doctors with mental health to come forward. So I found that incredibly enlightening and really very refreshing. So thank you so much. That must have been really hard, and I really appreciate that. Just going individually, Tommy, you know, I have to say, you know, it's very hard for men to come forward, and it's not me stereotyping, you know, as an expert in mental health, it's very difficult for men to speak about this because the pressure on society that we put on men, you know, to have it all together, to be the breadwinner, to be the sole provider, and not speak about, you know, your feelings and not cry. And that is changing, but that is incredibly difficult for men. And I think that you're an incredible role model actually for coming forward, and it is such a huge issue at the moment. You know, Michael Phelps has come forward with ADHD, Kanye West is bipolar. We need more men's voices, especially in the creative industry. It's so important, and especially the work you do. These conversations need to be had. You know, we all have mental health just as we have physical health. So thank you so much. And coming on to you, thank you for talking about, you know, your treatment actually with your anxiety. I think people need to hear these stories, and it is really rare we hear from creatives actually, which is so strange because I feel, you know, because I'm on the creative side as well, but I feel creatives, you expect actually us to be more open and emotional, and you have to be very raw in your work, but we still don't talk about, you know, management and treatment and diagnosis. So I really commend you, you know, mentioning CBT and that you got a diagnosis and you went to get help. And I think that, again, you're such an excellent role model, especially in the world of modeling and acting. We put a pressure on women to be perfect, to look a certain way. you know, and it's very hard to be a woman in this society, in that world, more so than I think with men. So I'm really glad you've come forward, and thank you for mentioning about CBT. CBT, you know, obviously is a really great treatment for those with anxiety and also depression. For those that don't know, CBT means cognitive behavioral therapy, and it looks at 3 aspects. So your thinking, your mood, and your behavior, and what you're doing. So what that means is, for example, anxiety, you might, I mean, it's different for everyone. It might be a scenario. I'll give you an example. I think I'm really anxious. I don't know what to do. Therefore, behavior is I won't get out of bed. I won't shower. And then your mood will be more anxious because you haven't got out of bed to go to work or whatever it might be, or hit your deadline, etc. I mean, that's a simple example. And it breaks that triangle. So it might be, despite you feeling anxious, you still will get up and shower and go to work. And therefore, then it will change your behavior and your mood. So thank you so much for mentioning that.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, if I may, and thank you so much for the interjection. 2020 society is giving the impression of being very mental health focused and tolerant of mental health issues. But in your experience, is it really?
I think there's a long way to go. I think conversations are being had about gender stigma, mental health stigma, LGBT stigma, and now ethnic stigma, okay? There's a lot of conversation to still be had. I think we're at the beginning, and I think there's a long way to go. Not just in the medical aspect. I mean, as I said, doctors are afraid to come forward with their mental health because they're afraid patients won't look at them the same. You know, I've had someone in the industry actually say, if you're a doctor, you're not allowed to have mental health because you won't be able to practice. You know, so there's a lot of thinking that still needs to change. But saying that, I think the younger generation are all about equality and diversity. And, you know, they're forward thinking, they're modern thinking, they want these conversations. And certainly, because I'm also in the creative side, it's becoming now a conversation to be had and to be taken seriously, because we're at a time you have to, especially in the lockdown pandemic and everything going on, obviously what's going on at the moment, these conversations need to be had because we are all experiencing our mental health at the moment on some range here.
It's interesting. One of the things you touched on was about men, and I'll talk about in a lot more detail about my own mental health journey in the second part of this program. But the one thing I found from the counselling and the therapy, the group therapy that I had, where there was nothing available for men in the daytime. So at the end of my course, the conclusion from everybody was the fact that I go off and start one. So I did.
Wow.
And it had been running for about 3 months before coronavirus. We had 12 to 15 regulars, guys of different ages from mid-20s upwards, just called Men Talk. All I did was put up a few posters. And I found that so therapeutic, because not only was my issues being addressed personally in a very selfish way, but the sense of satisfaction from bringing lots of different people together and knowing that you're not on your own. Yes. And I think maybe that's something I'll relate back to Tommy and something that you said about guys. As soon as you actually realise that other guys are going through that, it does change the dynamic.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you there, Geoff. I found that it's like it's that sort of old saying of, you know, a problem shared is a problem halved, and it really did do that for me personally. Like I found that the more I got comfortable with talking about it, it's kind of like if you can talk about it, it has less power over you. It's like almost like you're facing it, and then when you don't face, it's almost like if you don't face it, then it's got more. It's like the monster under the bed. You can't see it, but when you actually look under the bed, you realise, oh well, there's nothing there. Like actually, we've all got, or what is there is actually just something that's everybody's shared. Like everyone's got the monster under the bed, but no one really wants to talk.
I couldn't have put it better myself, to be. I couldn't have put it better myself. And I'm looking forward to continuing this in part 2.